Hey guys, it's Colin Campy for Fanatic Perspective, filling in for Steven and Gotti today. Looking forward to having a conversation about the Alamo Bowl where Texas fell to Washington 27-20. Before we start off the conversation, I have my good friends Austin Taylor and Ryan Klepser here to kind of talk about Texas sports. Obviously, fans just like the rest of us, and looking forward to diving into that discussion. But initially, shout out to Last Stand Hats. laststandhats.com/fanatic. If you put in the promo code fanatic10, you'll get 10% off kind of at checkout. They have great apparel for the collegiate teams that you're looking for. Well, guys, kind of disappointing way to end the football season for the University of Texas. As I said, all 27-20 to the Washington Huskies. Some of the major stats here: Quinn Ewers goes for 31 for 47, 66% completion percentage, 369 and a touchdown. The Longhorns rush for 51 yards. Kind of disappointing there without Roschon Johnson and Bijan Robinson, who are both going to the NFL. Casey Kane doubled his receiving yard total for the season, going over 100 yards. A lot of drops and kind of general mistakes on kind of both sides of the ball for the Texas Longhorns. A punt that was blocked, drops by the wide receivers, and kind of the inability to cover kind of the middle of the field for the defense. Penix goes 32 for 54, 59%, 287, two touchdowns and an interception. So those are kind of the broad overview of kind of the statistics of the game, but want to jump into kind of the good, the bad, and the ugly that I still kind of saw. Maybe starting off with the good, I thought, I was really impressed by kind of some of the young folks that played in this game. DJ Campbell, Terrence Brooks, I thought was excellent. And then, kind of going back to young players, I think we need to remember that Quinn Ewers is really young and, kind of came in after a really kind of struggle kind of throughout the back half of the year after starting really positively. Again, 66% kind of completion percentage, almost 370 yards and a touchdown is a really good game for most collegiate quarterbacks. So I thought I was really impressed by that. Austin, what were some of the goods that you had for the Alamo Bowl?
To start it out, I think if you would have told me pregame that Quinn is going to throw for almost 370 yards and, have a touchdown and no turnovers, and we were going to hold Washington to only 27 points, which is, I think they came into the game the number one of the number two offense in the country. Maybe Tennessee just barely edged them out there, but regardless, Penix Jr. is a stud. And if you were to tell me that, I'd be like, yeah, Texas probably won the game, especially with what I expected from Jonathan Brooks and Jaden Blue and those guys. But yeah, the good for me is kind of dittoing your thoughts. I think Quinn made some big strides in the second half, and he can build on that essentially. The first half was a little shaky. There was a couple bad throws, but I don't think his receivers, I wouldn't say let him down throughout the duration of the game, but obviously elephant in the room, his receivers did not play up to the standard that we as fans, and I really think if they looked themselves in the mirror would admit, it's the standard that they need to be playing with. But yeah, that's my good. Quinn is good, and you can build on that. I also think you have a running back one in Jonathan Brooks next year, although we didn't see him, directly take the handoffs that maybe we wanted to see, the volume carries. You saw what he can do in space. He had 2 touchdowns, obviously, but I love Keelan Robinson. I don't know if he is your future at the running back position as the bell cow, but those are probably my 2 biggest. I thought the defense, the secondary, played really well. For the most part, you saw Terrence Brooks flash. You saw, some guys that won't be here next year. Anthony Cook was defensive player of the game, I believe. He had a good game. You wish the defensive line was a little bit better. We'll get into that soon. But I did see some bright spots there. I saw Ethan Burt get some good run in and guys like that. But those 2, Quinn, Jonathan Brooks, and then what you have returning in the secondary, those are probably my biggest 3 takeaways from the good side of that game.
Ryan Klepser, tell us some of the goods.
I'm going to go a little different than Quinn. I think Quinn did great as well, but Casey Kane, I think, coming on and having 4 receptions, 108 is something that we have not seen all year from him. I think he was just shy under 100 yards actually the entire season. For him to come out and have that type of game really gives some confidence to Quinn. I think that was important. The bad side of it, I think the defensive efficiency on third and fourth down. Washington was 11 for 20 on third and 2 of 3 on fourth. So, and it came at key moments in the game, right? I think beginning of the fourth quarter, there was a 3rd and 3. We got him down to a 4th and 1, and then of course went for it and got it. And then that led to the touchdown that put him up 2. So, or 2 scores. So that was to me the bad. The ugly was definitely the drops. I think that second one that Quinn threw on 4th down, deep down the middle, that was a 14-point swing. Colin and I were talking about that yesterday while the game was happening, and it really didn't give us any, ways for us to make that comeback with the amount of time that was remaining in the game. Another thing that caught my eye was the time of possession. Washington had 2 possessions in the second half that I believe lasted over 5 minutes. So when you do that and you're leaving your defense on the field, I think that contributed to Austin, which you mentioned about the defensive line. They're just going to be worn down. And so that didn't help. So those 2 things culminated to, I think, what turned into a tough night for us.
Yeah, I think when you look broadly at this defense from last year to this year, and we've kind of touched on it previously, and I know Steven has touched on it a lot, is that there's been, vast improvement from what we saw at a defensive unit from last year to this year. But I think my bad, maybe similar to you, Ryan, is kind of on those money downs, right? Those 3rd and 4th downs where you look back at the Texas Tech game, you look back at, Oklahoma State this year, and obviously you kind of look back last night on that inability to just get off the field. And a lot of it has to do with kind of those middle of the field throws. I think, Penix I think he missed 1 throw underneath 10 yards from the middle of the field, as a statistic I saw on Twitter last night. And that's just kind of not going to get the job done. I think the offense obviously was lacking in the first half, and that puts a lot of pressure on your defense. But again, giving up 27 to one of the best offenses statistically in college football isn't a terrible kind of thing. But there are some adjustments that they need to kind of take a look at going into next year. For me, I think the ugly was, this is something Austin touched on, but just, the drops. You can't have it. When you're driving down the field, you're down, I believe 7 or 10 at the time. And, you have a wide receiver 1 who is making a lot of noise, off the field. There's a lot of, I think, conversation about, what that individual wants to do. And you can't just have that drop when Quinn Ewers has struggled kind of throughout the year, connecting on the deep ball to put one right on you, kind of run toward the end zone. I think is a really tough predicament kind of for that young quarterback. Austin, you touched on a little bit, but maybe expand on kind of the defensive struggles that you're going to talk about.
Yeah, to Ryan's point, I mean, when you're on the field that long and for that many plays, it doesn't matter if you're the 85 Bears, you're just going to wear down. So I don't blame those guys. I don't think it was a lack of effort. It was also a Washington O-line that I looked up this morning. I think Penix had only been sacked. I think ESPN ran it like 1% of his dropbacks or something like that. Over 500 dropback attempts, and he was only sacked less than 10 times. So credit to Washington and their O-line. I mean, I saw Barron Sorrell was getting doubled a couple times, and we had I wouldn't say we had just breakneck pressure. There was a lot of times where Penix just did what he does and got the ball out early, but not only got the ball out early, I just think he throws strikes. I mean, I was really trying hard last night. I was like, man, what is the last lefty that I've seen that is as accurate and just has high velocity throws like Michael Penix Jr.? I mean, he was just throwing darts all night, and, sometimes you just have to tip your cap. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, the defensive line has been really good this year for the most part. It's been a really good unit. I think Bo Davis has done a really good job. But I think more so last night as we all calmed down and kind of, wake up this morning and the sun's still shining, I think a lot of it was Washington's O-line was really good. And also to Ryan's point, when you're on the field, for 6-7 minutes at a time, I mean, it doesn't matter who you're rotating in. I mean, those 14, 15 play drives where it's like gain of 5, gain of 2, gain of 4, first down, those are the ones that just wear on you as a defense. And it's a slow and painful death almost. We've witnessed that with the TCU game this past year. It felt like when you absolutely had to get a stop, and I know they did late in the game, but when you absolutely had to get a stop, there in the middle portion of the game, Washington just did a really good job of converting. Barely converting on some of those, but a conversion is still a conversion. So, yeah, I mean, they'll clean it up a little bit, but it was more so Washington looked like the more physical team for the duration of the game, and sometimes you just have to tip your cap.
Yeah, I agree with that. And, it is coming with multiple players obviously going to the NFL next year, but I did think it gave kind of a showcase for some of those younger guys obviously to come in and play. I think I was a little disappointed with not showcasing Jonathan Brooks a little bit more when you think about a guy who showed that he can kind of run in between the tackles with the time that he had against, specifically, I suppose, Kansas when we were up kind of a good amount and Roshan and Bichon didn't need to be on the field. And, Keelan is a very impressive athlete, but I think kind of a guy more designed to get outside of the tackles rather than kind of run in between the tackles like we did to start the game off. Ryan, any kind of last thoughts before we maybe go on and talk about some players going into 2023?
Yeah, I just think the disappointing thing, 0 sacks, 0 tackle for losses. Their run game killed us too. I mean, Wayne Talapapa ran for 108 on 14 carries. I mean, I think for the most part this year, one thing that was our strong suit on defense is we kept most running backs in check, right? Guys that were getting over 100 yards. You think about Miller for TCU or, the Kansas State running back too. He's Deuce Vaughn. I mean, those guys ran all over everyone in the Big 12, and we were able to keep them relatively in check to what they're normally doing. So that was one piece that I was surprised at, that we didn't come out and play better. Not having Overshown, that's a big piece. You're missing your main guy in the middle there. Luckily, we will have some folks to fill that gap next year, but that was probably my final thoughts. Just the run game defense also didn't culminate with what Penix was doing, like Austin said, which was slinging that thing all around the Alamo Dome.
Well, it's kind of a wrap on the season, and obviously I think it's 247 days or something till we get to kind of enjoy Longhorn football, next September. So obviously, the season generally I think was right around, general consensus expectations, and I think there was a lot of positives kind of going into, obviously the end of this year, both, with the team and obviously with some of the recruits coming in. So with that, Austin, is there somebody who's sticking out either recruit-wise coming in or maybe a younger player that you're looking at kind of going into the 2023 season?
Yeah, it was kind of a note that I had too. I just think Texas has to find a true number one receiver before next season, whether that's Isaiah Nayor, whether that's, Jonte Cook as a recruit or maybe another guy that they add late in the portal with productive depth at, the number 2 and number 3. I really like Casey Kane. He lacks a little bit of speed, but he is known to be pretty reliable, especially yesterday. I think he could be a really good number 2, number 3 option, and who knows what we're going to get out of Jordan Whittington. But Savion Red, Brennan Thompson, I think the pieces, I mean, it's a loaded wide receiver room, especially with Jonte Cook coming in. But I look for one of those guys to really break out next year. And I mean, who knows, Xavier Worthy, I expect him to be in a Longhorn uniform at this point, but I think it's fair to at least have the conversation. I know some guys on Inside Texas were talking about that, as we just don't know if the reliability could be there next year to potentially be a number 1. I mean, he was setting records last year as a freshman. I think we all had higher expectations, and he probably did for himself as well. That's usually how this goes, is, you build on years as you're in college football. And I think, we saw a regression this year that nobody expected. So who knows if it's a sophomore slump potentially. I hope so. I hope that's the case for Texas's sake. But I'm looking forward to Sadir Mitchell in the middle as well. And then obviously, Arch, probably not immediately, but, just the effect that he brings just being on your football team. But I'm looking for probably a Jonte Cook or a Ryan Niblett to get some early playing time. You could also, to Ryan's point, say Anthony Hill as well to fix a gap in the middle. Our coverage linebackers really were exposed a little bit last night, and that's no disrespect to those guys, but it's hard when you're asked to do a job that you really haven't done all year. So really excited about the class in general, but those are a couple names that just jump off the page for me.
Ryan, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, those are all key points to look at. I think for me, it's going to be the running back room. having Keelan, having Blue there too, and then Jonathan Brooks, and then you have Cedric Baxter coming in. Those are 4 guys I think that all could compete for playing time. And I think Sark just has to figure out how to use each of them. I think they each could be a value. Obviously, Baxter is a bigger back, and I'm sure they're going to put on some weight to him once he comes in for spring ball, which I think he's early enrolling. Using Keelan on the outside, we talked about that. Jet sweeps, I mean, they're running him up the middle last night, which was pretty interesting to see. But that's going to be what I'm going to look at, is how those guys progress through spring ball, through the summer. Who's going to take charge of that room? Because I do think we have depth there, which is good, as everyone knows. In the last couple of years, having 2 solid running backs in Roshan and Bijan were helpful at times, especially when maybe one wasn't doing as well as they needed to be, and we were able to use the other. So that's what I'm looking at, I think, for spring ball, is the running back room and what transpires there.
Yeah, I agree with you guys. When you look at the wide receiver room, there should be ample talent, not only with the recruits coming in with Ryan Niblett and DeAndre Moore, and obviously Jonte Cook kind of being that star piece, but you got to remember Brent Thompson will have another year under his belt. Savion Red will have another year under his belt. Who knows what Jordan Whittington does? So, there should be enough talent there to where we don't have those kind of mistakes that we kind of saw last night, whether, Xavier returns or not. And then Ryan, obviously looking at Bijan and Roshan leaving, that leaves a huge gaping hole, right? And they've done a fantastic job, obviously, getting Cedric Baxter, kind of loading up with Jonathan Brooks, Jaden Blue, and maybe utilizing Keelan in a way that can be more productive next year. Rather than, maybe running in between the tackles. But maybe what I'm looking at is folks to step up kind of at the defensive end or edge position. I think Barron Sorrell did a fantastic job this year. But I'm looking for, and Nathan Burke to really put on some weight and kind of, maybe shine on the other edge. I thought the defensive tackles were fantastic this year. Obviously Keandre and Tavondre Sweat, Byron Murphy continuing to develop. I thought those guys were great, and really looking forward to seeing, more progression from that defensive line. And maybe some last thoughts as we kind of look towards spring ball. We have a ton of kind of early enrollees, including kind of the star piece of the class being Arch. So, those guys are going to come in and kind of compete. What's the most intriguing storyline you guys have for spring ball coming up? Austin, how about you?
For me, it's probably off the beaten path a little bit, but really it's the secondary. I think Malik Muhammad can be a 3-year starter and then off to the league. I think he's that good. I think Terrence Brooks is obviously, going to be that guy, maybe with Ryan Watts at the boundary corner next year. I think Jalen Gilbo, once he's healthy, can be really good. And I think BJ Allen, the freshman this year, he redshirted. But the kid from Alito can be really good. So I'm intrigued by that secondary. It's going to be really interesting to see who PK trots out there next fall in the opener. Just that'll be really interesting for me to see with, Malik Muhammad from South Oak Cliff being as talented as he is. And from everybody, from what I'm hearing, he is ready to go day one. So with Terrence Brooks being highly touted, with Ryan Watts coming back, I think that secondary is definitely a big key storyline for me.
Ryan, what about you?
Yeah, I'm going to say 2 things. One of them being the portal, seeing if we can bring anyone else in off. I know there's still some time there. So seeing what other opportunities are there for us as it relates to the portal. And then going away from more so the players, but seeing if there's any staff adjustments. I know a lot of those guys are in their first year in their positions, so I don't expect too much of change. But, that would be interesting to see if, that could affect some recruiting changes, some flips, things like that. So seeing how the staff relates, if, Gary stays as the special assistant to the head coach, always an interesting role. See if they give him more of an opportunity or if he goes elsewhere and they bring in someone else for that role. Curious to see how that lands with maybe play calling as well. If that stays in the hands of what Sark and what he's doing, or if he maybe takes off that role a little more.
Yeah, maybe I'll finish up with the big one, and that obviously is Arch coming in and kind of battling for that starting quarterback position. In my opinion, I think it's very difficult as a collegiate program to constantly have freshman quarterbacks come in and start. I think there's a massive jump, no matter who you are, whether it's Bryce Young or CJ Stroud or Tua or whoever, to come in and kind of constantly have a new person kind of starting as a leader in the offense. But to have somebody like Arch coming in to hopefully continue to push Quinn. We didn't see Malik last night, but Steven obviously tweeted this, I want to say last week. Malik looks the part. Malik looks like what Vince Young looked like physically. And we haven't had a guy that's kind of looked like that in a very long time. So generally just kind of very interested in seeing, hopefully how those guys push each other and kind of what they can show during, spring ball going into the spring game. But guys, it's been a, great having both of y'all on the show and kind of wrapping up the football season. Obviously, like I said, I think it's 247 days or something like that for the next Longhorn football game for the 2023 season. The Longhorns finish 8-5, lose 27-20 to the Washington Huskies. For myself, Colin Camphy, for Stephen Gotti, Austin Taylor, and Ryan Klesser, this is Fanatic Perspective. And as always, the horns always go up. So hook 'em, and good football year. Looking forward to 2023.